The year is 1212. Across Europe, the world feels like it's ending again. Drought has blighted crops, famine stalks villages, and plague murmurs in the corners of rumor the Crusades. Those grand promises of salvation through conquest have curdled into something bitter. Every few years an army marches east toward Jerusalem. Every few years it vanishes into the sand. And then, somewhere in the French countryside, a child begins to preach. He is small, barefoot, and luminous with conviction. He says an angel visited him in a dream and gave him a letter for the King of France. The letter, he insists, came from Christ himself. It commands the faithful to take up a new crusade. Not of soldiers this time, but of innocents. He has no sword, no army, no banner, but the cross painted on rough linen. Yet he speaks as if the wind itself answers him. People come out from their homes to listen. When he raises his arms and says,
"The sea will open for us as it did for Moses,"
no one laughs. The boy's name, at least in this telling, is Stephen of Cloyes. And when he begins to walk, others fall in behind him. To understand what followed, you have to imagine the texture of that age. It was a world terrified of God and desperate for his attention. The Fourth Crusade had just ended in disaster. Christian armies sacking Christian cities, popes feuding with emperors, holy relics looted and sold like souvenirs. The faithful were weary, the poor forgotten. In every church, the sermons promise the same impossible trade: obedience for deliverance, suffering for grace. And beneath that promise lay a yearning, a belief that maybe the innocent, not the powerful, could move heaven. When word spread that a shepherd boy was gathering an army of the pure, villagers took it as a sign mothers blessed their sons and daughters through tears. Fathers handed down wooden crosses, telling their children to pray at every milestone because the adults had failed. And perhaps only the uncorrupted could finish what the warriors could not. Stephen's following grew like a storm. First dozens, then hundreds, then tens of thousands. Peasants, orphans, apprentices, even priests joined the march. They sang hymns as they walked, their voices echoing over fields stripped bare by hunger. Chroniclers describe the sight as both beautiful and terrible. An endless ribbon of youth winding through France, banners fluttering, songs carried on the wind. In some villages, they were greeted as saints, in others as lunatics. People threw them bread from windows, believing they walked with angels. When they passed through towns, markets emptied, and children slipped into the crowd, unable to resist the pull. Some mothers chased after them for miles, screaming names swallowed by hymns. No one led the procession but Stephen, a boy barely in his teens, face gaunt from fasting, eyes bright with purpose. He promised that when they reached the sea, it would part before them. God would clear their path to Jerusalem. And so they walked toward Marseille, toward the edge of the world. The summer sun turned fields to dust. The march slowed, thinned by exhaustion. Some turned back. Others died on the road, buried under cairns of stone. But still, thousands pressed on. When they reached the southern coast, they saw it at last, the glittering line of the Mediterranean, infinite and impassive. They dropped to their knees and prayed. For 3 days they waited. No waves parted, no dry path appeared. Their miracle, it seemed, had been misheard. Hunger became panic. Faith began to splinter into blame. Some accused Stephen of lying. Others said their sin had delayed God's hand. And then, as hope frayed, 2 men appeared, wealthy merchants, offering ships. They said they would take the children to the Holy Land for free, that it was God's will. 7 ships departed Marseille, filled with singing children. Only 2 ever came back. What happened on those ships has been debated for 800 years. Some say they sank in a storm near Sardinia, swallowed whole by the sea. Others tell a darker story, that the merchants were slavers, and the Children's Crusade was sold into bondage in North Africa. One chronicler claimed a survivor washed ashore years later, half mad, muttering about cages and markets. He said one of the ships, ironically named the St. Nicholas, had indeed reached the coast of Egypt. There, the children were divided among buyers. The smallest fetched the highest price. Whether fact or folklore, the story fit the mood of the age, a miracle turned inside out. The faithful betrayed by greed, innocence consumed by commerce. And perhaps that's why it endured, because it explained something too painful to admit outright, that even holiness can be exploited when the world is hungry enough. Far to the north, another boy was gathering followers. His name was Nicholas of Cologne, and his vision mirrored Stephen's almost perfectly. He, too, preached that purity could reclaim the Holy Land. He, too, promised that the sea would open. By the time Nicholas led his followers across the Alps, his army had swollen to over 20,000 souls. Children, widows, monks, beggars. They sang hymns as they climbed through the passes, freezing and barefoot, their skin blue from cold. Many never made it out. Some fell to their deaths. Others vanished in avalanches. Those who survived reached the Italian coast only to find the same cruel stillness of the sea. A few settled there, too weak to return. The rest scattered, their names lost to history. In their wake, towns built shrines. Priests preached sermons about misguided faith. And parents, those who still believed their children alive, whispered prayers to saints who never answered. When the news reached Rome, even the Pope was shaken. Pope Innocent III reportedly said,
"These children put us to shame. They go to the Holy Land while we sleep."
But no decree followed. No investigation, no rescue. The Church folded the tragedy into its tapestry of parables, useful for preaching humility but not accountability. In time, the story hardened into myth. The children became saints in sermons, fools in chronicles, and ghosts in songs. Their failure was reinterpreted as devotion. Their deaths were absorbed into faith itself. That may be the most haunting part of all, how easily the living turn disaster into doctrine. For centuries, historians repeated the story without question, that tens of thousands of children literally marched toward Jerusalem and perished. But more recent scholarship suggests something more nuanced and no less tragic. The word hueri, often translated as children, might not have meant youth at all. It may have referred to the poor, the small ones, the powerless. These were not schoolboys, but peasants, farmhands, displaced orphans, the wandering poor. And yet, even stripped of miracle, the story remains devastating. Because whether they were 12 or 20, they believed. They believed that faith alone could overturn the world, and the world, predictably, devoured them for it. The Children's Crusade is, in the end, less about children, and more about the fatal chemistry of hope and hunger. In France, they said the sea still whispered with the songs of the lost. In Germany, old women warned their grandchildren never to follow strange preachers, no matter how holy their faces seemed. Chroniclers kept their names alive in margins and monasteries, and by the Renaissance, their story had become legend, an allegory for innocence betrayed, zeal corrupted, but traces remain. A ruined chapel near Cologne, a handful of medieval letters hinting at mass departures that year, the bones of small bodies found in Alpine passes. The facts are uncertain. The grief is not. In some ways, the Children's Crusade and the Pied Piper of Hamelin are the same story told in two dialects of grief. In Hamelin, a stranger's song led children into a mountain. In Europe, a preacher's call led them to the sea. Both stories begin with a melody too beautiful to resist. Both end in silence, and both reveal the same truth. When hope becomes obedience and belief outpaces reason, even faith can be fatal. When modern historians sift through the records of 1212, they find gaps large enough to swallow whole generations. The weather records show famine. The tax rolls show missing names. And in the Chronicles of Cologne, there's a single line: quiet, factual, heartbreaking. Many of the pueri did not return. No one knows how many died, but for centuries after, mothers lit candles on midsummer nights for children who never came home. The march that should never have happened had become something else. A story told to make sense of loss, to give shape to faith's shadow. The Children's Crusade never really ended. It changed forms. Every generation has its march, the cause that promises salvation, the leader who says belief alone is enough, the crowd willing to follow. We've traded crosses for flags, hymns for slogans, prophets for politicians. But the rhythm is the same. A voice calls, the faithful gather, and the sea still refuses to part. The Children's Crusade proved one thing. Faith can lead people farther than any army, even into the arms of ruin. But history doesn't only remember the grand tragedies. Sometimes its darkest echoes hide in the smallest places, in rhymes whispered to children, in gardens planted with symbols no one alive can fully explain. When innocence and horror intertwine, a simple nursery jingle becomes something else, a map of violence, a riddle of queens, a story sharpened by fear, politics, and blood. Next time on Lore&Ruin, Mary Mary. Quite contrary, the nursery rhyme of death and power.